Spawn says, I loved the Zinch reference on one of your recent streams. How long have you followed Warhammer 40k? So obviously, if you were like a kid of my generation, so basically, like, this is how I knew that my mother had got me into the middle class. Basically, I knew because I could suddenly have hobbies. So it was like when I lived on one of the worst estates in Britain, like an old colliery estate, where basically it's like as soon as you left your house, you could be like plunged into combat with other fucking starving children in various states of undress. I mean, I'm not joking. Kids used to run around my estate like naked. Their parents didn't even like put clothes on them in the morning. And you would just see like kids like just, you know, stalkers, like just running around, throwing stones at each other, throwing stones at windows, going into other people's gardens. Like, you know, they would just come into our garden where I live. We had a tiny little garden, and they would come into our garden and they would like dig up our garden. They would like dig up all the plants and like take any plants, any plant life, any trees. They would do that. So basically, like, the only thing I had growing was, I mean, to be fair, my mother, raised by a single parent, my mother did grind and graft to get me a Spectrum Plus 2, which sort of started the whole love affair with video games. That was basically like I should say a 48K first. We had a 48K and then the Plus 2 came later. But you know, she got me a Spectrum, which is where you loaded games off a cassette. And that was probably like £100, which was a lot of money at the time. Maybe £80, but regardless, like a lot of money. So basically all I sort of had was like games and books. And they were all very like socially insular, isolated, stay indoors, read a book, play a video game. And that was perfect because I couldn't leave the house, essentially. We were like hostages on our council estate. I didn't have a dad. He was in prison. All the other kids wanted to fight. If you fought and won, their cousins, brothers, and then eventually the father, they would just come and beat the shit out of you. Like, it didn't matter if you were like 8, 9, 10. A 40-year-old man would just kick the shit out of you in broad daylight, and that was just how it was. It was just like, that's how the estate maintained the pecking order, you know? So it was just better to stay indoors. And so when my mother got with my stepdad, and he had his own house, you know, it wasn't a council house. He had his own house, and it was a detached house in the country. You know, suddenly I was going to school. Yeah, there were bullies, but it wasn't, if I see you outdoors, I will batter you with sticks and stones and put you in hospital bullies. They were like, your trainers are shit bullies. And I loved that. I loved being ridiculed for being poor because that's just feelings. It's not, you're getting attacked, you know. It didn't last like that. There were still fights to be had. There was still violence to be perpetrated against me. But anyway, back to 40k. There was a group of kids at that school. They were in that weird little social strata where it's like wealthy nerds. So not nerds in the sort of like, you know, like they can't talk, but like wealthy nerds. They have nerdy hobbies, nerdy expensive hobbies, and they're not cool. They're not in the top social strata, but they're not outcasts either. They just sit nicely in the middle. Nobody picks on them. Nobody bullies them. They got money. They get do what they want. And so I was kind of like welcomed in by that group. And a lot of those kids played 40k, and so 40k was basically like a super expensive hobby. And I was like saying to my mother, you know, like, fuck, man, like, you know, I better start buying some fucking Space Marines or whatever, you know, like, because if I can't turn up and just bring some models along to show I'm really down with this shit, then, you know, maybe they're gonna start picking on me for being poor again or whatever it is. So I actually started, I can even tell you this, there's a Games Workshop in Middlesbrough. It used to have one of the big dudes at Games Workshop used to work there. Like one of the guys that actually used to like write the books. Not like, or used to be an illustrator. It wasn't like Jez Goodwin. It was like Ian something. And he's like well known. He's like a Games Workshop legend. So I started hanging around there. And basically, I always looked a little bit older. So I started like hanging around there. They all assumed I was like 16, 17 when I was really like 13, 14, you know. They were like super cool. Like that was like a really good spot to be in because, you know, I basically realized like I could use this hobby to sort of like stay out of shit at school, but I also was meeting like older people. And like, for example, when Reservoir Dogs was banned in the UK, it was a guy called Chris at Games Workshop that gave me a fucking VHS copy like when I was like 13 or something. So I was like the king. I was like, you want to come watch Reservoir Dogs, that banned movie? You know, I got that through Games Workshop. So I actually went and got a part-time job at a restaurant. And so I started using my money to like buy 40K so I could fit in with the kids. And eventually, you know, like I had a pretty good collection. I didn't even really like the game. I always preferred Warhammer Fantasy, but no one played that. And so yeah, I used to fucking turn up, you know, like when we used to come into school, and I'd be like, yeah, I just got this fucking land speeder. Look at this, it's got a Lehman Russ tank. Deal with that. They'd be like, holy shit. For a poor kid, you fucking got some banging shit, you know, and it's because I was working and getting it myself. Started out as a pot washer, so in a restaurant. So yeah, it was like, anyway, I've always sort of kept up with it. I don't know about now because I think Games Workshop's a shitty company now, but I think that back in my day, I think it was a really, really good hobby that encouraged if you could afford it, it encouraged socialization. Like, you would go to Games Workshop, you would hang out there, you would bring in your painted models, there would be games nights almost every week. It used to be something, man. It really did. So I won't wax all lyrical about it and say that like it improved my life or whatever, but it's definitely been like like an ever-present thing that I've always been super aware of. And it's like a long, long time. I mean, you're talking, that's like 95 to put it in context. But obviously, I mean, shit, I wanted to do something to, like, stop drinking and writing so much. Because when I write, I drink. And when I drink, I look to write. And it's just, like, this horrible cycle. So I got, like, a Dominatus or whatever. I got, like, a Dominatus box set. And I was going to paint the models, but then just never did, like. Never did. So there you go. Yeah, basically, yeah, I know, it's like everyone in the chat, wow, things were so much better. Things were better before. It's not nostalgia. So yeah, there was squats. Squats was still a thing back then. I think I even had the Squat Biker Gang box set, just as an ironic, and the Squat Snipers. I remember the Squat Snipers, the stunty units, all being a bit overpowered. And I had the Ogrin Ripper Squad or whatever. I had that. That was beardy as fuck. But then it was like, because this was coming out back when it was still called like Rogue Trader. I think this was like 2nd edition. And so suddenly then what happened was they really went hard on the Realms of Chaos stuff. And then Chaos was the beardy units. And then obviously Games Workshop entered a golden age. I stopped playing 40K because I had a choice of, I could play the new edition of Blood Bowl, which was wicked. I could play Necromunda, best game they ever made. I could play Gorka Morka. That was actually low-key fucking sick. Trying to think what else, man. There was like just every game they seemed to touch in the oh, Mordheim. Mordheim was fucking unreal. You know, like they just had a run of games that they just made in like the mid 90s that were just fucking mid to late 90s that were just all insane. So